Ngayon na ang panahon upang bumangon tayo muli. Tayo na tayo.
So we will, in essence, be talking about, in my world, about the supply side of the housing market, where the objective is to suggest, recommend ways and means that will enable the supply curve to shift outward, rightward and downward. In other words, to increase the supply of housing, which everything else remaining the same, will obviously decrease the prices and increase the housing units sold. That's what we want to do. Well, how is this to be done? Well, economics will tell you that if you want to influence supply and increase it, you'll do it by lowering production costs, through lowering input prices and technological advances, by influencing the prices of related goods, by government policy, and by special influences. We have 5 discussants in this effort, 3 from government, 1 representing the social housing developers, and 1 from academe. And before I introduce the 1 from academe, let me just remind the discussants that we are 5. Usually there are only 4, we are 5. So I suppose we are going to have to discuss, to divide this seminar into 8-minute speeches. That's 40 minutes. That will leave about 12 minutes for asking the question and answer, the participation of everybody, and the rest for introducing you and introducing me. So we'll start with academe. And here we're talking about the Dean of the College of Architecture, University of the Philippines, Diliman, and she will be talking about the importance of enhancing policy development and implementation skills to the success of the housing program. How important is policy development and implementation? I suppose she's going to be talking about implementation, but Grace Ramos has a tremendous background. She has been in academia since 1992, but she has been teaching in the fields of housing, urban design, architectural design, infrastructure, technology, and public space management. So without further ado, let's hear from Grace Ramos, Dean, College of Architecture.
Thank you, Ma'am Monsal, and good afternoon, everyone. I will be tackling 5 policy areas around which production and delivery strategies may be formulated, and you can see them listed there. I'll begin with the first policy area. Next, please. The first policy area calls for the formulation of the big picture for stakeholders to imagine where residential bases will be over the long term. What we now have is a dominantly monocentric form. We have a mega city where the clear divides between high-end, middle-class, and low-income housing locations are captured by the night satellite view of Metro Manila, as you can see there. Now, decisions need to be made. Do we want to continue with this strong center trend, or do we want to deconcentrate? Do we want those bright lights evenly distributed instead of them being very intense at the center? A spatial plan for the whole Philippines should be clear and accessible enough to inform infrastructure and catalyst project investments that will direct housing development locations. Next, please. What this GIS map on the left says is that where you find the highest concentration of high-end housing is also where you find the highest number of informal settlers. This spatial disposition is represented by a jagged bid rent line where you have depressed points representing informal settlements. Therefore, housing is needed where economic drivers are located. Hence, residential land use zoning is a proactive exercise that matches supply with demand. In-city housing supply cannot be left to the market forces. Government intervention in the form of land allocation, land use planning, land banking, land readjustment are needed to guarantee supply in the city centers. Next, please. Equity and access and balanced development are among the principles underlying the Urban Development and Housing Act of 1992. These translate into a socialized housing system that is operationalized through simplified procedures across subsidy system and a 15% to 85% ratio of open market and low-cost housing that are ideally contiguous or at least very near to each other developments. Also, what we dominantly have are packages for sale, when there are other options such as long-term lease, rental, and even time sharing. And what does not happen in the Philippines is the filtering process where households move to better housing as their financial circumstances improve. Instead, we see core houses getting extended horizontally to cover the setbacks, the easements, and even the sidewalks, or are extended vertically to 3 to 4-story structures. Next, please. We keep hearing of the 7-digit figure housing backlog, but we are also seeing housing supply with no takers, or of many cases of informal settlement relocatees eventually leaving their formal housing sites. Adequacy of supply is determined not only by quantitative matching of units and households. Good design entails matching of house features with user profiles with cultural considerations factored in. And low-cost housing should not mean low design standards. We have the National Building Code with provisions for residential structures, and then we have BP 220 for socialized housing. Why should there be 2 sets of minimum standards for health and safety? And how far have we really gone in terms of using new technology to bring down the cost for mass housing? It's one thing generating new technology and another thing getting them accepted by the market. Next, please. With residential development comes a need to internalize costs that are largely borne by the end users or the rest of the city population. These are externalities such as blight, pollution, vehicular traffic, and all of these environmental problems resulting from real estate developments. We should be asking questions such as, what are the environmental impacts of forcing the dumagats out of the Sierra Madre Mountains? There is a gap in the management of our built environment because there's the National Building Code to regulate buildings and the local zoning ordinances regulating land use at municipal or city level, but there's no regulatory framework for the neighborhood level issues. The collective neighborhood form affects property values and quality of life at household level. So whether they be for permanent abodes or for investments, housing products should be guarded against negative impacts of ongoing and future developments. And as a final statement, we know policy making to be a process that entails a lot of balancing act, and finding that ideal fulcrum would define good governance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dean Ramos. Your talk was awe-inspiring. And now for our second speaker, I hope you will stay for the questions after everybody has spoken. For our second speaker, we have Napoleon Concepcion, member of the Board of Governors, Philippine Board of Investments. He will be speaking on the Board of Investment incentives to developers and builders of construction material under the CREATE law. Mr. Concepcion has a very colorful past. He finished from the United States Air Force Academy sometime in 1974 or 73, went to the Philippine Army in the Philippine Air Force, worked as a pilot for Philippine Airlines and for Saudi Arabian Airlines, and then worked also as a tribal missionary pastor in Mindanao. He's now in charge of the comprehensive automotive resurgence strategy, and he has been involved in founding a civil society, but his experience with housing is because he co-authored a study founded by the Philippine Center for Population Development in cooperation with the Davao Association Colleges and Universities, in which he talked about the housing for the poor, the San Pasada experience. I don't know which of these activities he is going to be drawing upon for his presentation, but welcome.
Thank you, ano ba tawag sa inyo, Dr. former Secretary Sonita Monsod. It's very intimidating to have you as our moderator for this afternoon. Anyway.
Okay.
Anyway, I hope I can share this. Nag-practice ako kanina pero let me stop sharing first. Let me organize myself.
What's your name?
Sandali po ha. Nagkaka-problema ako rito. of for producers and builders. It's all related to my job as one of the governors of the Board of Investment. Very technical, very short, and miski anong practice, talagang things go wrong.
Sir,
So
we
good
already
afternoon
have
once again. Okay, I'm ready. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for being so kind in bearing with me while I settle all of these technical issues. So let me walk through the role of the Board of Investment. What role does it play in the overall DTI strategy for industry development? Because basically we're known to be as a industry, we're commonly known as the Board of Investment rather than pero people know us for being the Board of Incentives, which is highly not only part of what we do, because we're into industry development. And what we do is yung expertise na ating moderator, trade deficit reduction, simply, it's increase exports and reduce imports, but then it's not that. It's more complicated than that. We do value creation to make higher value products from our indigenous resources by sharing opportunities. We also do global value chain integration, creating enabling pathways for stakeholders in our local supply chains to get access to global value chains and social contribution to promote inclusivity. This is important, and then impact investments to make the bottom of the pyramid partners in progress. Now, next slide, please. Can I have the next slide, please? Yung susunod pa dyan. Okay, create does not only stand out. Ang topic of today is the effect on how create affected our industries. And create stands out because it reduced income tax, corporate income tax from 30 to 25%, or for small and medium enterprises not earning more than 5 million with initial capitalization of 100 million, their corporate income tax was reduced 20%. The Create Bill also created a single menu of incentives, whether you're registered with the Board of Investment or with PESA. You share the same kind of same list of benefits. So you have income tax holidays. That's the same as before, and then enhanced deductions. We have more enhanced deductions now. Can we have the and then at the lower next slide is instead of the IPP. Under EO 226, Executive Order 226, Create utilizes the Strategic Investment Priority Plan. And basically it's the same, and it's the Board of Investment that prepares this in coordination with the FIRB, the Fiscal Incentive Review Board, the investment promoting agencies and other government agencies administering tax incentives in consultation, of course, with the private sector. Just like the IPP, the SIPP will have to be submitted to the Office of the President for his approval. Next slide, please. Under Section 300 of the CREATE Law and Section 4 of the IR Implementing Rules and Regulations, incentives are provided to a project or activity covered by the Philippine Development Plan or its equivalent as published by the National Economic and Development Authority and under priority government programs or any of the above 10 parameters in the SIPP. So basically, number one, if it's a substantial amount of investments, then we classify the incentives that we can give based on how big the investment is. If you are creating considerable number of jobs, therefore the more employment you give, you hire, the more people you hire, the bigger the incentives that you will get, and so forth and so on. I will not go through the list, but there are 10 parameters. And under any of these listings, you may be able to enjoy any of the incentives that has been provided under CREATE. Can I go next slide, please? Unlike the IPP under EO 226, they have created a tiering under CREATE, and this is very critical because your tier level, as it is classified, will determine how much benefits or incentives you will an activity will get. Now, the tiering is again limited or identified through the Philippine Standard for Industry Classification. That's a PSIC they call. And for housing projects, right now they're debating whether to cover it under construction or the realty sector. So there's, depending on which category it falls, what PSIC number it falls, can have a very big impact on its possible incentives. So can we go to the next slide, please? So this slide shows the tier level. Next slide, please. Okay, here are the preferred activities under the 2020 IPP. Now, why do we go back to the 2020 IPP instead of the SIPP? As well, I missed to point out, the SIPP is still being crafted by the Board of Investment. It's due for release maybe January of 2022. And then we'll have to do the stakeholder consultations, and eventually maybe around March or April, it will be submitted for the approval of the President. So why is the 2020 IPP important? Under the CREATE, the 2020 IPP serves as the transition IPP or SIPP. So every registration, every application for registration is categorized under the old 2020 IPP. Of course, you'll see number 7 in red is mass housing, so it's a preferred activity. And as you all know, most of the people here know that we only encourage mass housing projects or give incentives to mass housing projects to remote areas to contribute to the Balik Provincia Bill, which was signed last year, to encourage or decongest the urban areas in light of the pandemic. So most of the direction of the 2020 IPP is basically to address the difficulties that our economy had to endure under the pandemic. So we had to prioritize the preferred activities that will contribute to a V-shaped recovery. And then, of course, the other programs that were in play, that were passed, the other laws that were passed during that time, the Balik Provincial Law, and the Bayanihan Act 1 and 2. So 2020 IPP is COVID-oriented. However, the SIPP is going back to a more refined or retuned manufacturing sector. So memorandum the BOI incentives, the memorandum order number 50, can you go back to the old slide? So basically, the 2020 IPP was designed as a reboot strategy to combat the effects of the pandemic, accelerate the V-shaped recovery. I've already mentioned that. And then to support an innovative, industrial-driven economy, for which the CREATE is supposedly help the direction of the CREATE bill. Okay, next slide, please. And so now we have the BOI incentives. So generally, we give incentives depending on the tiering, as I've said, and then you have to go back to the PSIC, which identifies your tier and the type of incentives. Applications for registration for housing projects are considered for the development of economic and low-cost housing, in-city low-cost dwelling for lease or rent, manufacture of modular housing components, balik probinsya-related programs, and environmental or climate change-related projects. So if you have a housing facility or housing project that has solar panels, then we can upgrade you to another tier where you can get more incentives. So basically, that's it. And we are still exploring because the congestion is in the urban centers, is NCR in particular, and people come to the urban centers for work. And therefore, we're also considering, we have not released, but we are studying the escrow arrangement to allow housing the socialized housing requirement according to UDHA, the law, can already be in form of an escrow instead of actual construction, because as based on field study, developers are having a difficult time looking for land even outside of Metro Manila. So maybe it's best that we just support the project, the direction of DSUD as they do their work, and the stakeholders, our industry partners, have been very amenable to putting in the funds to assist NHA, SHAPC, and other services of DSUD. So we're also exploring, as you might have noticed, that there are workers' dormitories in Singapore. And if we can build more dormitories for workers specifically, then maybe we can decongest Metro Manila, so our laborers do not have to bring their families and they don't have to be homeless. They don't have to fill in our informal settlements. They can be all part of the economy, and these are all the things that we would like to do. And basically, if you have any questions, I think the last slide will show that you can contact us on www.philippinesbusiness, because my area of presentation for today is quite technical. So if you have any questions, please drop us a call at www.philippinesbusiness.business, and we're on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. So maraming salamat po, and I apologize. It's very difficult to make a presentation. Lumipat ako sa Windows 21 and I'm not still familiar with the Windows 11, and I'm not familiar with how it works. So again, apologies for a botched presentation, and hopefully I get the passing mark from our Dr. Solita Monson.
Well, I just wanted to clarify before I introduce the next speaker. When you're talking about mass housing, you only talked about economic housing and low-cost housing. Does that mean that socialized housing is not part of it, or do you have different terms?
Yes, ma'am. Actually, all housing projects.
Socialized housing is included.
According to the law, UDHA, socialized housing is a compliance requirement for all developers. They should build at least 15% from either from the total investment cost, 15% of that, or the total land area, 15% of the land area must be dedicated to socialized housing. That is the law. And
Not being
according
compliant.
to the law, they don't get any housing assistance, and that's why the Board of Investment came in to encourage our developers to build more by saying before that if they build 20%, that's 5% more than what is required by law, we'll give them the incentives.
Okay.
So that's how we motivate them.
Thanks.
However, because of the pandemic, we said, you cannot stop building. You have to build more. We are encouraging people to go to the province. So if you build just the requirement of law,
Yeah.
we'll give you the incentives because everybody's in trouble.
Well, thank you very much for that
Thank you,
explanation. And now we have our third speaker, and he represents the social housing development sector. Excuse me. He is chairperson, Marcelino Mendoza is chairperson of the Organization of Socialized Housing Developers of the Philippines. And he has been in the business since time immemorial, I think. Anyway.
Hindi siya ganun katanda, ma'am.
Hindi naman. I'm not saying that, but he's been there forever, well, not really, at least 30 years, no? And he is going to be talking to us about solutions to streamline housing procedures. Mr. Mendoza, the floor is yours.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone, and good afternoon, Dr. Monsod. This topic of ramping up housing production has long been discussed and analyzed. Of course, the 6.5 million housing units backlog, and it's still increasing. Much has also been said about the 27 offices, 78 permits, 148 signatures needed to develop raw land into housing. The good news is the Anti-Red Tape Authority, ARTA, is on top of this and will be coming out with a joint memorandum circular on building permits. I think this is on the breakout sessions. The important thing to watch out is to harmonize local ordinances with national laws. This is the challenge. And if I may suggest, we feel technology, and in particular, digitalization, will be the game changer in providing solutions to these processes. Now, we are in the midst of coming out of the pandemic, and what we need are economic boosters. Well, of course, the POGOs have left with a lot of middle-end housing and condos vacant. But call centers and BPOs are resilient and will continue to grow. Housing, mass housing, can be promoted in the same vein as build, build, build. And we have long advocated for this. The big advantage for housing is it is shovel ready. It answers a big social need, the housing backlog, and generates a huge number of employment and multiplier effect on related industries. No need for tedious contract blockages like right of way in the build, build, build. We don't have to look that far. Australia implemented a lot of similar measures in the last 18 months. This is another of the things that we feel should be emphasized. Now, go local. LGUs are the key. We have underestimated the importance of local government units, LGUs, in providing solutions to the housing backlog, and they have underperformed. With the transfer of funding as a result of the Mandanas ruling, they would now have an increased war chest for their disposition. They know the most important resource, the raw land. This is something that private developers are well, everybody, including NGOs, are having a lot of problems sourcing. LGUs know this. They know the market. These are the beneficiaries. And they know the amount or the number of backlog in the respective areas more than the national government instrumentalities. Queuing, however, has to be institutionalized for efficiency and transparency as being done in other countries. The Comprehensive Land Use Plan, CLUP, and the Shelter Plan must be made mandatory and operationalized. My last point is the NGOs must be made a cornerstone component and workhorse. The NGOs possess certain key attributes that neither the government nor the private sector do not have. They are the experts in the following, which are vital ingredients of success or failure in public housing projects. One is social preparation. We have to teach the future beneficiaries the values of saving, financial literacy, and entrepreneurship to make the process sustainable. And second, NGOs are very good or can be very good in property management. So future developments need not revert to becoming slums or slum-like again. The NGOs are not being recognized and appreciated for what they do best. Thank you, and that is the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much. Oops. Thank you very much, Mr. Mendoza. Clearly, you are talking about the harmonizing local government and national government. In other words, the focus on government management or how government participates in this sector. Now, our last speaker, is that our last speaker? Excuse me. No, our second to the last speaker is somebody from the Housing Department of Human Settlements and Urban Development. She is the Director of Public Housing and Settlement Service, Rowena Dineros, who has also made her career in the HUDCC. She's been there for 26 years, and her topic is going to be development and adoption of a national strategy to ensure the alignment of programs and policies in providing affordable and sustainable housing to Filipino communities. Wow, that's a mouthful, Ms. Dineros. So go on and enlighten.
Yes. Good afternoon, ma'am. DG Munsod, for the information of Professor Munsod. Ma'am, I was with NEDA when you are our Director General.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, ma'am. I'm with the project monitoring staff then before I went to HUDC. So,
no wonder your face is
I'm
so
a fan, ma'am.
Okay.
Magandang hapon po sa lahat, to our colleagues and development partners in the housing sector. On behalf of the DSUD family, I would like to thank Habitat for Humanity for holding this forum with the theme of Building Forward Better for Inclusive Housing. And it is indeed an honor to be part of this event. Next slide, please. I just go through, ma'am, kasi 5 minutes lang daw po. So I believe yung outline po, the outline is basically on discussing more or sharing to you what are the programs, projects, activities, and policies formulated by the DSUD, the infant DSUD, because we're on our second year of creation since 2019. So we will be giving you an overview of the DSUD under RA 11201, the National Housing and Urban Development Sector Plan, and of course the PPAs and policies in partnership with private sector to pursue the provision of housing and addressing the 6.5 magnitude of housing need. So let's proceed with the next slide. with the RA 1121 pursuant to the creation of the DSUD. The DSUD serves as the primary national government entity responsible for the management of housing, human settlement, and urban development, and the sole planning and policy-making, regulatory, program coordination, and performance monitoring entity for all housing, human settlements, and urban development concerns. Attached to the department are 5 agencies. Three of them are on the finance side, which is basically the Home Development Mutual Fund, the National Home Mortgage Finance Corporation, the Social Housing Finance Corporation, and the production arm, of course, is the National Housing Authority. And we have also the newly created HSAC, the Human Settlements Adjudicatory Commission. This is basically half of the functions of the HLURB, the Housing and Land Use Regulatory Board, then, and together with HADSI, the functions of these 2 agencies are consolidated in the Department of Human Settlement. So, except for the Home Guarantee Corporation, under the EO number 58, HGC is now merged with the Philippine Import-Export Credit Agency. Before, it's one of the attached agencies of under the HADSI. Next slide, please. This is recently we have this National Housing and Urban Development Sector Plan crafted, and it's approved by the National Human Settlements Development Board. The NHS USDSP basically addresses or aims to support the achievements of the goals under the Philippine Development Plan and Ambition 2040, and also aligns with the Sustainable Development Goals, and making the country an active participant in the global efforts towards sustainable urban development. Further, of course, it is consistent with the National Urban Development Housing Framework. The plan envisions urban systems that are competitive, economically vibrant, and livable, and it sees cities, municipalities, and settlements that are environmentally sustainable, climate resilient, safe and connected physically and spatially and digitally. The plan envisions to create an inclusive Philippine demonstrating equal access to livelihood opportunities and enabling informal settler families or ISFs to live their lives with more pride and dignity. Embedded in the plan, is the milestones are indicated as follows on time slices of 2021 to 2022 until 2040. So we have this 25% for that first time slice of housing needs for ISF. We have a vision or goal to address this by 2022. And by 2022 to 2028, it's 30% of the housing need. And for long term, until 2040 is 100%.
At which
let
time
me share.
it will no longer be there.
Yes, ma'am, I agree.
Somebody else will take responsibility.
Yes,
Okay.
anyway, let me share with you the programs, projects, activities, and partnerships with the private sector. Next slide, please. First of which is, of course, we have this DSUD private sector partnership, housing production through balanced housing development. During the initial year of the DSUD last year, 2020, the Subdivision and Housing Developers Association, or SHEDA, signed a MOA with the department. The local shelter plan formulation program of the HADSI now the DSUD caught the attention of the developers group. The local shelter plan program basically provides technical assistance to local government units in the preparation of their local shelter plan, or the LSP. It is basically, the LSP is a roadmap for an LGU in the delivery of housing provision to both the formal and non-formal sector or beneficiaries. This includes situational analysis, affordability analysis, resource analysis, implementation plans, and strategies. In short, the developer sees this as short of a project, housing project. So they grab this, they want this done together with the DSUD and assist local government units in translating these plans into actual housing units. And so far, the DSUD has provided TA to the technical assistance to 1,571 LGUs out of the universe of 1,634 LGUs nationwide. However, there are only 300 local government units which has an approved local shelter plan by their sanggunian. Next slide, please. Before we proceed with this slide, I think we have to inform the body what are the eligible partnerships. The previous slide, please. The eligible partnerships under the MOA with SHEDA and the DSUD. Of course, there's this construction of socialized housing projects, land owned by the local or donated to the local government unit. As mentioned earlier, basically land is one of the hitches or the bottlenecks in the implementation of a housing project, especially in a local government unit. So next slide, please. We have also a partnership with, of course, the Habitat for Humanity. In August of 2020, the Habitat for Humanity and the DSUD signed an agreement to address the housing needs of low-income and vulnerable families. The partnership basically aims to ensure the strategic alliances are formed and appropriate partnerships are developed in pursuit of
3,974 allotted for housing agencies. This figure is only 0.08% of the 4.5 trillion national budget, or a mere 0.02% of the country's GDP. With such budget, it is estimated that the government can only build around 2,000 out of 1.8 million homes it plans to build for informal settlers by 2022. This was confirmed by the National Housing Authority Chief Marcelino Escalada, Sir June, himself in a recent budget hearing. This is very alarming indeed. Although naabutan na po nito, kaya po we are really working hand in hand, no? Whenever we see this amount will hardly make a dent in the housing problem. That is the reason why, as a vice chairperson of the House Committee on Housing and Urban Development, I co-authored House Resolution 1468, which declared a housing crisis in the country and urged the Executive Department to mobilize resources to accelerate housing production and provide adequate housing to underserved families. With the housing crisis at hand, I hosted the Housing Summit in my district in San Jose del Monte City last year to discuss the various issues in housing, particularly housing for less fortunate families. We invited Secretary Eduardo Del Rosario of the by then a newly created Department of Human Settlements and Urban Development, the SHUD, NHA General Manager Marcelino Escalada Jr., House Speaker Lord Alan Velasco, and my chairman, Negros Occidental Representative Francisco Benitez, who is the chairperson, I've said, of the House Committee on Housing and Urban Development. I am also the oversight chairman of this committee. During the summit, we discussed many issues involving our housing problem, and it all boiled down to fiscal support and finding innovative ways to partnering with the private sector to address the problem. On our part, we, the members of the House of Representatives, have pledged ways to allot 50 billion every year to address the housing backlog. To provide a backbone to the members of the House of Representatives, our housing committee is already in the final stages of approving a consolidated bill entitled the National Housing Development Production and Financing Act, which shall, among others, allot 50 billion as initial seed money for the financing of public housing, resettlement program, government employees housing, subsidy for informal settlers, amortization support, housing program for calamity victims, among others. The 50 billion yearly fund will be known as the National Housing Development and Production Fund and will be solely used to cover the cost of housing production and its implementation for a period of 20 years from the effectivity of the proposed law. So kahit sino po maging presidente at maupo, hindi na po ito mababago basta ito po yung maging batas. To ensure continued support to housing initiatives, the bill mandates a guaranteed 50 billion of the NHDPF every year for the next 20 years until the backlog is addressed. Nasasabi ko po ito dahil nanggaling po ako at narito po ako sa lugar ng relokasyon, but now a destination. We hope to pass this bill before the end of the current 18th Congress. Last year, we passed on the third and final reading a bill, House Bill number 159, which seeks to strengthen the rights of the government to expropriate lands for socialized housing. Marami po kasi mga nakatenggang lupa, pero hindi naman po nakakabayad ng buwis. At sa kakulangan po ng ating pabahay, ito po ay aming minarapat na gawin. This proposed law gives the local government units or the proper agency acquiring the land for socialized housing the power to identify and gives the local government units or the proper agency acquiring the land for socialized housing the fiscal position and lifting the exemption units or residential lands to ownership which are socialized subject to fiscal pending litigation. Gives the local government units or the proper agency acquiring the land. We also passed House Bill number 8248, which institutionalizes on the on-site, in-city and near-city resettlement program that would uphold the urban sports right to the city, saving them from suffering faraway relocation sites. This also empowers settlers to design their own communities and provides them with basic services and livelihood component, as we have here in the city of San Jose del Monte since we started our administration. This was this initiative of Speaker Velasco and overly supported by the House of Representatives as part of our commitment to ease the housing backlog and at the same time provide our people with sustainable communities. Dito po sa aming lungsod, ma'am, hindi na po kami, nagkaroon po ng moratorium ang ating city mayor, na bawal na po munang tumanggap ng mga relokasyon galing po sa ibang lugar, ibang bayan, hanggat hindi po namin na nakukumpleto ang pasilidad para po sa kanila. Hindi po kami tumatanggi sa hamon, pero iniaayos lang po ng ating punong lungsod ang paglipat po ng mga ating mga kababayan. Again, the said is awaiting Senate's approval. We're also set to approve a bill entitled An Act Establishing a Local Human Settlements Board and the position of local human settlements officers in cities and first to third-class municipalities. Kasi po, the reason why we are doing this dahil dito nga po sa aming lungsod, lagi ko pong hinahalimbawa, dahil nandito po talaga itinapon, sabihin natin ibinaksak ang lahat ng bigat pagdating po sa housing. Pero ito po'y kinaya po ng ating administrasyon sa ngayon. This bill seeks to institutionalize human settlement concerns in the local level with the participation of people's organization and other stakeholders. Ako po ang chairman doon, ma'am. The local human settlements board shall be composed of members that will formulate, develop, and recommend to the Sangguniang policies, rules, and regulations to provide decent and affordable housing and resettlement areas, taking into account the right of the underprivileged and homeless to just and human evictions and demolition. Dito po sa lungsod, the other day po, November 5, we just awarded housing facility to the disadvantage. Ang laki po nito ay nasa 90 square meters. Kompleto po. Meron na po siyang tiles, may restroom. Kompleto na po. Hindi po katulad dati na yung mahihirap po ang nag-finish. Ito po ay finish na po na itin-turn over natin. An initiative po of our GM June Escalada. This shall also help in the preparation for long-term, medium-term, and short-term local shelter plan based on the local shelter plan guidelines under the DHSUD, which will form part of the city or municipal development plan. Importante po na magkatuwang po ang mga ganitong klaseng asihensya at LGU. This will make any local housing plan more dynamic and holistic because members of the local human settlement board will be inclusive. We have the city or municipal mayor as the chairperson, the vice mayor as the vice chairperson, and other officials of the city or municipality, as well as representative from DHSUD. Other members are representatives from the Presidential Commission on for the Urban Poor, the PCUP, na ating pong katulong po sa lungsod Azaros del Monte at sa iba pong mga bayan. Another from a major realty operating the city or municipality, representative from a people's organization, the POs, and one coming from a non-government organization, the NGO, as we say, also operating the city or municipality. The House of Representatives have also called on the DHSUD to conduct an inventory of all the government lands and fast-track the disposition of the same for the socialized housing in accordance with the Republic Act number 7279 or the Urban and Housing Development Act 1992 and Republic Act 11201 or the law creating the DHSUD. We have also strongly urged the Department of Finance, nakiusap po kami, and the Philippine Guardian Corporation to develop a framework for a dynamic housing finance system to encourage private sector participation in the housing market. Personally, I have made a call and cut the red tape in housing construction permits. Ito po ang nagiging problema na amin pong talagang tinututukan dahil yung mahihirap po kahit po sa pagkuha, pag-apply ng kuryente at pag-apply ng kanilang mga bahay para ito po'y maitayo ay nagkakaroon po ng problema. Pero sa ngayon, ito po ay halos bawas na. A company which seeks to build socialized housing will have to go through 27 offices, 78 permits, 146 signatures, and 373 documents. This process usually lasts for 2 to 4 years before the first housing unit could be constructed. For me, this is a necessary bottleneck that is hampering those who want to participate in socialized housing. This is totally unacceptable, especially when it comes to giving decent and affordable housing to our underserved families. To address this, we have asked the Anti-Red Tape Authority, the ARTA, to work hand in hand with the DHSUD to improve efficiency and cut down bureaucratic red tape, and we are happy to note that the ARTA has committed to help achieve the purpose of the law. I am aware that this may be an ambitious and goal considering the challenges of COVID-19 pandemic. Mahirap po, alam po natin lahat yan, but slowly we are doing it po. But I believe we have committed and passionate housing and local government officials and the private sector who are very much willing to work together to enable every Filipino family own a decent and affordable house they can call their home. The issue on housing is something that is close to my heart. I represent a city, as I've said a while ago, that is one of the primary relocation sites in the 1980s to 1990s. In fact, most of our population in San Jose del Monte City are relocatees from various informal resettlement sites in Metro Manila. But ngayon po, if you will see our place, we're very, very good na po. Our barangay called one of our district, we have two districts. Sapang Palo is one of the biggest relocation sites in the Philippines. Nung panahon po ng ating Pangulong Marcos, we also have the Pabahay 2000 in Barangay Luzon. Panahon po ng ating Pangulong Erap, Towerville in Barangay Milonia proper, panahon naman po ng ating Pangulong GMA. Our city is a melting pot of residents who came from different areas in the country. Many of them were informal settlers along creeks, esteros, riverbanks, and railways na nadala po dito sa amin sa lungsod. As Winston Churchill had said, we shape our dwellings and afterwards our dwellings shape us. I am very proud to say to you today that because of the commitment and dedication, of course, I'd like to compliment my husband. Ma'am, my husband is the Mayor Arthur Robes, and I had put in the city this past several years. Our city has now transformed from a mere relocation site and not as San Jose del Monte City from relocation, now a destination for many people. Gone were the days when San Jose del Monte was a dark, unserved relocation area. Ang daming madilim at nakakatakot na lugar. Ang isa ng maunlad na syudad ay ngayon ay isang maunlad na syudad. It is now a rising city with hospitals, educational institutions, thriving businesses, recreational facilities, tourist sites that could rival those in neighboring cities. We could be in competition. President Rodrigo Roa Duterte has declared San Jose del Monte a highly urbanized city. And God willing, we hope to formulate such a declaration in a plebiscite, hopefully by next year after this national election. We have embraced and nurtured the diversity of our residents by providing them with services they need and deserve. Ang hirap po, pero ito po ating kinaya. We have established and expanded social services, ensured peace and order, and instituted our own cultural heritage. We have likewise initiated programs that will make our city the human resource capital. Ma'am, ang aming pong populasyon ay 1.6 million sa gabi. Sa census po ay nasa 700,000 plus po kami. Ang voting population po namin ay nasa 267,000 po. Medyo erratic po ang numero, but it still entails a lot of sacrifice to serve them all. Our city, the human resource capital of the Philippines, through the establishment of skills and livelihood training centers and promotion of quality technical vocational education to help our residents acquire proper training to join the labor force. Maaring marami po may hirap sa aming lungsod, pero ma'am, I am very proud to say that marami po magagaling at masisipag na pamilyang San Joseño. It is my strong belief that aside from giving our people housing units, we should build for them sustainable and exclusive communities where they can have decent and safe lives again, and very, very engaging community. And we're striving to achieve our resident city of San Jose del Monte. We would not have done this without the help of our partners in national government. Maraming salamat po. And I would like to mention again the indispensable help of our President Rodrigo Roa Duterte, Senator Bongo, Labor Secretary Silvestre Bello, to name a few, for their invaluable support to the many projects for the people of our city. Collaboration has always been the hallmark for all great endeavors, and I'm extremely happy that we have achieved some major accomplishment in our city with this partnership. I hope that this kind of collaboration will continue, make a difference as we address this basic human right, housing. I know much has to be done to solve this crisis, and it cannot be done by the government, as in Congress or the local government alone. We need a whole of a nation approach to solve our housing woes. We all need to work together to give our people, especially our less fortunate families, secure, safe, and affordable houses in communities that is well enabled them to thrive and grow and reach their full potential. The task is not easy, but with our collective efforts and commitment, we will be able to bring this into fruition for our future generations. Once again, to all of you who's been listening to us, thank you for Habitat for Humanity. Once again, maraming salamat po, and God bless you po. Lalo na po kayo, ma'am. Thank you so much for this So haba po, I really have to talk fast kasi ang dami po eh. Sorry, ma'am.
I know. Thank you very much, Representative Robes. It is a fact that we have 5 speakers, and we just don't have any time. We have been given 15 minutes, but already we are 9 minutes into that 15 minutes. So we are not going to have much time for discussion. But I'd like to start with asking Dean Ramos, do you think that the San Jose del Monte model of housing is a successful or an unsuccessful illustration of what housing and making it into a city and urban development is concerned?
Definition of success is very relative. We will, from the point of view of local government, definitely the criteria would be very different if you would ask the end users. So for a genuine assessment of the impact of a project, it's necessary to go back to the very beneficiaries that the housing intended to serve. So post-occupancy evaluation instruments are there to find out if indeed the objectives have been met from the point of view of the beneficiaries.
Okay, and but as far as policy is concerned, which to you is the most important policy development that should be and has not been acted on by the government?
The Urban Development and Housing Act of 1992, as written, is perfect with all the principles explained there. But the translation, for example, the 15-85 ratio, allotting for 15% for socialized housing, while this is being complied with by developers, they would throw this 15% component outside the fringes of the city when they are supposed to be ideally contiguous to the high-end.
In other words, developers have been going around the loop. Okay.
There are cases where they get thrown off the 15%, very, very far from the amenities that they are supposed to be having very convenient access to.
Okay, let's hear from Mars Mendoza. What do you say to that charge? That the developers have kind of made taboy the socialized housing portion.
Well, I think it is very unfair.
You think so?
Developers are throwing out socialized housing beneficiaries. No. I think it is a fault of the system. That land is really very exorbitant already. And so there is very little land that is available where the jobs are. So this is something that we must solve. It is not in the law, by the way, that it is going to be in situ or in the city, inside the city or near city. So we might have to amend the law if we want the term. And again, I beg to disagree. Developers are throwing these residents outside.
Grace, is it within the law or outside of the law? What was the intention?
Buddha says it's supposed to be in the same city.
No,
ideally, it's
all right. Let's ask the DHSUD. Ms. Dineros?
Yes, ma'am.
Is the socialized housing supposed to be in the city where they are developing, or it can be outside the city?
Outside. It can be outside the city.
It can be outside the city.
Yes, ma'am.
So that
but
is ridiculous.
If you would translate the cross-subsidy system, it's not possible. The very concept of cross-subsidy is hinged on that proximity. Anyway, we can go on and on with this discussion.
No, because it's very important, because this has to do with the poorest of the poor. And I've heard this charge leveled, Mr. Mendoza, way back in 2015, 2016. They said that the socialized housing, because it's a requirement, they just try to go around.
Alis na ba sila doon?
They're not going
Excuse me.
around the law, but
We are not going around the law.
yes,
It
but
so happens that land is not available where the jobs are. I've said that, and that we have to remedy. We might have to revisit the law. And as for intentions, we might have to ask the legislators.
Well,
that was the intent of the law.
Congresswoman
Because the law
Robes,
is that is
Congresswoman
specific.
Robes,
It can be outside the city.
you should pay attention to this because Dean Ramos insists that there cannot be any cross subsidization without the socialized housing being near the higher end buildings. Diba? Is that what your point is, Grace?
Yes, because they can share, for
Yes.
example, the cost of access road, and if there's a commercial
Exactly.
development there, that they can also access.
All
There
right.
are creative ways by which this can be complied with.
Okay. So now I'm going to ask something about to the BOI speaker. I mean, Mr. Concepcion. You know, the redundant, the government gives incentives to those to developers who are building for the non-poor. In other words, they are giving income tax and VAT incentives to the low-cost housing developers, where low-cost housing starts from 1.7 million. That is way over the incomes or the ability to pay of the economic and socialized housing. You're talking about, for example, the incentives in 2015 amounted to 3.5 billion pesos that was forgone by the government in terms of incentives to the developers. And the point is it possible to change that so that the they pay taxes and this be given to, say, Pag-ibig or housing loans for low-income earners? 3.5 billion is a lot. That was in 2015. In other words, Mr. Concepcion, I am saying that the income tax and VAT incentives are being given to the developers of housing that really can be afforded. But as far as the poor are concerned, they are not affected by it.
Yes, ma'am. The 1.7 or 2 million cap for low-cost housing is
3 million ang cap for low-cost housing.
it's a low-cost housing for the incentives. Above the 2 million or 2.5 million, I think we've upgraded it. This is the limit to be classified as a low-cost unit. And then the socialized housing that we are asking the developers to build is in the price range of 450,000 and below. Now the question really has been, I mean, we can discuss this back and forth, but there are.
Well, it has to be discussed back and forth because it has never been.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
It has never been
the thing
resolved.
is, it's both. Housing is both.
We're going to be discussing this back and forth till the 20th housing forum.
Yes. Yes, ma'am. That's correct.
I think something has to be done at this point instead of saying, we got to discuss it sometime else.
Yes, agree. However, I think what we need to address is that housing is both a public and a private good. See, we cannot leave the homeless because they do not have any paying capacity. We can just say forget them and then they can sleep in the sidewalk. Housing should be treated as a public and a private good.
And how
now, yes, ma'am. Now all of these discussions, however, when it comes to incentives, again, it is based on paying capacity. We're helping promote livable and affordable housing. Affordable, accessible, and then livable. Those are the things that we are trying to subsidized, so to speak. Now, we have given or placed most of the housing burden on the private sector. Yes, ma'am. The DSUD has received very little in government support. They are one of the, I think they only received, I think
less than 1%, ma'am. Sir, less than 1% of the total budget.
And Congresswoman Robes is going to do something about it, or they are doing, or they are acting on doing something about it. But the point is that the incentives that are now being given to the developers are given to those who are, who are low-cost housing, which is 1.7 to 3 million, and that housing can be afforded. I mean, can be paid for by the people. Did you know that 1.7 million house can be afforded only by the top 10% of our income scale, the top decile?
Agree.
So why are we concentrating on them when we're not concentrating on the 9 income deciles before them?
I agree.
I saw in the family income and expenditure survey. I cannot understand that. I mean, yes, I'm new to this game. I just was invited here, and so I did my homework, and it was very frustrating for me.
Yes, everything that you said is valid, and we have seen that deficiency. However, we are limited. For example, I have a daughter who is a professor. She has a PhD. She's a professor in MSU. She cannot even afford to buy a 1.7 or a 2 million house because of the salary in government. But then, of course, that's the way the structure.
So why are we helping the developers of the 1.7 and 2 million? Only the top 10% of our country can afford that. What we are saying is, why aren't you concentrating on the bottom 90% or the bottom 80%?
Yes, ma'am. If we allow the developers to build where it is very profitable, then they will build high-end and then probably middle-range housing, and they will not even touch the low-cost housing, because it will be very profitable.
So in other words, well, why don't you just give it directly to the low cost? Why do you have to? Well, never mind. Okay, I see your answer. That should be enough. Well, for the socialized housing, Mr. Mendoza, what are the main elements in the cost of production of socialized housing? What is the most important cost element?
The most impactful is really the cost.
I beg your pardon?
The most impactful is the cost.
I cannot hear you. Ariane, I cannot hear Mr. Mendoza. What is it? Land, labor, materials, which is the most expensive? Land.
It's almost the same.
And
Mars, garbled ka, Mars.
You are garbled.
Mars, audio.
So
land is the most impactful. It's the most important. Land.
Yeah.
Land development is not that high or variable. Housing construction is not also that variable. It is land. And we have to
I'm sorry. I cannot hear you. I'm sorry.
Mars is saying that land is the most
land.
Land, followed by.
Well, housing construction is another one.
Construction.
Is number 3.
Labor and materials.
Yes.
How much of labor and materials? So give me a ballpark figure. How much does what proportion does the cost of land play in terms of the total housing?
It depends, but roughly maybe 40% is land.
I cannot answer. Hindi ko kayo marinig. Well, that's what I want. Well, because I was saying that if you are going to try to increase the supply of housing, you have to tackle costs of the input costs. And if the input costs of land is the most expensive. You need the help of government in that. And so
We really need to help.
the legislature, up to now, as Representative Robes, has not yet passed the National Land Use Act. They've been asking for this Land Use Act since I've been following it. And you have not. And so what is happening is land is being converted, and so that people cannot use the land properly. Hindi ba? Ano ginagawa niyo, Congresswoman?
There are a lot of land, even public land or government land, but this has yet to be really identified. If we can just unlock this land, government land,
Let us
We
remind
need
you.
to move to the next session.
Okay, you have the food terminal. It was given to Ayala. You have the Trinoma. It was given. This was all government land, and so government, I think, is the biggest what do you call it? Biggest criminal here in not allowing housing for the poor in situ, because all those lands in the Makati became a Makati Hotel, which was supposed to be for urban poor, and it became the Makati Hotel. Unbelievable. So government has a lot to answer for here, and I am so glad. Thank you very much. We are supposed to have Miss Suplido. Miss Suplido.
Yep, here. Yep, hi,
sorry.
Winnie.
Go
Sige.
ahead. I got carried away. I'm
Interesting,
sorry.
right? Okay, but we have to move on to our next, to our breakout.
Of course.
So, thank you very much, Winnie. And so on behalf of Habitat for Humanity Philippines and the Asia Pacific Office, our event sponsors and partners, I'd like to present our plaque of appreciation that reads, this plaque of recognition is presented to Dr. Grace Ramos, Dean of UP Diliman's College of Architecture, Mr. Marcelino Mendoza, Chair of the Organization of Socialized Housing Developers of the Philippines, Mr. Napoleon Concepcion, Governor of the Board of Investments, Ms. Rowena Dineros, Director of DSUD's Public Housing and Settlement Service, and Congresswoman Florida Robes, representing Bulacan and Vice Chair of the House Committee on Housing and Urban Development. And of course, our very well-known plenary moderator, Professor Winnie Monsod, for each of your invaluable contribution to our plenary 4 on facilitating house production through policies and partnerships at this Philippine Housing Forum 2021, Building Forward Better for Inclusive Housing. You've all been instrumental in elevating housing to the center of the national agenda and seeking innovative, sustainable, affordable, and climate-resilient solutions to our country's housing issues. Signed by Lourdes Gutierrez Alfonso, Chair of the Habitat Board of Trustees, and Mr. Luis Noda, Asia-Pacific Vice President for Habitat for Humanity International. So again, thank you so much to our session speakers. And now we will move on to our breakout rooms. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
We have just finished plenary session 4 on facilitating housing production through policies and partnerships. We will now be divided into breakout sessions. You can see on your screen the 3 breakout rooms that you can select from. Please simply click the session that you want to join. For breakout room 1, the topic is on solutions to streamline housing procedures. Breakout room 2, policies and systems to increase access to land shelter. And breakout room 3, incentives for developers and producers of building materials. See you all in the breakout rooms. Thank you.